so we're going to have a conversation with our guest in the studio, the visiting Foreign Affairs Minister for Norway, Espen Barth Eide. Good morning, Foreign
Good
Minister.
morning, Eric. It's great to be on Spice FM.
This is the hot seat of the situation. How does it feel?
It feels, I'm honored to be here and I'm looking forward to a conversation.
We've upped the temperature, to match you.
Thank you.
Normally we make this room very, very hot, but today, just so we make it a comfortable temperature, we've brought the temperature down to about 3 degrees, which is pretty hot, knowing that your room temperature is usually -5 in Norway.
Yeah.
So it's very cold for us, but I'm sure it's warm enough for you.
It's fine, thank you.
Karibu sana. Our colleague C.T. Muga would normally be seated there, but he's traveled out of town today. He always goes to one African country every week. He mines proverbs from that country. He's a researcher. Then he comes and gives us a proverb a day from that country. And the job of a guest is to listen to the proverb and give us their interpretation of the proverb. He left me with that assignment. This week, the proverbs are from the Gambia in West Africa. Have you been to the Gambia?
I have actually been to the Gambia many years ago, yes.
Many years. How do you
Yeah.
like it? How do you like Banjul?
I remember Banjul. I was there as a very young boy, actually. So it was very different from today. It was a calm, pleasant place at the time.
Different from what
I
it
was
is
actually
now.
on my way to Guinea-Bissau, which I visited with my parents just after independence. So we went to see Luis Cabral, who was the brother of Amilcar Cabral, the great leader of resistance in Guinea-Bissau. So Banjul was on the way there, actually.
All right. So the proverb for today from the Gambia: if you stir up water in the pond, you will bring up the pond. If you stir up water in the pond, you will bring up the pond.
You
What
will
do you
bring up the pond.
Yes.
So maybe it means that you should treat water carefully and remember what kind of a resource it is, and not something to be wasted. It's something for animals and for people to drink, and not to waste. That would be my immediate interpretation.
It was a very direct one. What do you think the deeper meaning would be?
That needs some deeper reflection. What do you think, Eric?
I don't know.
Yeah.
If you stir up the waters in the pond, you bring up the pond. Let's just look at it from the context of what, for example, you have done, the foreign minister for Norway. Norway and other Western European countries have stirred up the pond in the matter of Palestine.
Yes.
You have formally recognized.
We have formally recognized Palestine, one of the first European countries to do that. It should be said most of the world recognized Palestine many, many years ago. So you would say maybe that's not news, but many of the Western European countries did not. We have been working Norway through the Oslo Accords for decades, dreaming of the day we can actually recognize Palestine, but we used to think that would happen at the end of a negotiated process. And then we decided maybe we could use it as impulse into what is now going on, because we have a horrible situation in Gaza, as we all know. 37,000 people killed, 80,000 mutilated, maimed by war, but everyone affected by either by famine or by water shortage, by diseases. We have trouble also in the West Bank, the other part of Palestine, and in Israel proper. People are afraid of terrorism. So this is a cycle of violence, and we want to get out of that and re-establish the hope of a two-state solution, one Palestine, one Israel, and that's why we did it. And thankfully, other European countries are coming along, taking our cue.
Why did you decide to do it now?
Well, we decided to do it now because we always knew it was the right thing to do, but we were looking for the right moment to do it. Over the last months, I've been working with a number of Arab and OIC, Islamic Cooperation countries, but also some other like-minded European countries, to try to form an alternative path where we could have peace in the Middle East embedded in the broader region. And there's an Arab peace initiative, which I'm quite supportive of, saying that you could trade a Palestinian state, an irreversible path to a Palestinian statehood, with normalization of relations between key Arab states like Saudi Arabia and Israel, strengthen the Palestine Authority, the proto-state that is already there, weaken other armed groups, and put all this into package, and that's what we're working on. And I have some hope that if we now get to a ceasefire, which of course is the immediate imperative, we can use that momentum to move forward on the path to a two-state solution. I could, but will not, but I could give you a long lecture why this is difficult. It's just that the lecture on the other alternatives is even longer and more difficult. So I keep optimistic that out of this horrible mess, this tragedy of Gaza, we can actually see a new path towards a Palestinian state. And that's the moment we chose to recognize, together with Ireland and Spain. And then soon after, Slovenia followed, a small European country, but a member of the Security Council. And more are coming along in the coming weeks, I believe.
Obviously seen as something that could bring about a double outcome, whereby on one side the recognition of a state that has been contention for decades then could come about, but at the same time that we would possibly see an end to a lot of the catastrophe that we've seen. So it was one idea that could bring about a double result across board that was acceptable by many.
So, I mean, more and more people around the world understand that there is no real lasting solution, but for the one with the two states, because Israelis want to have a Jewish state and they also want to have a democratic state. And if you look at the area between the river and the sea, as they say, that area now has around 7 million Israeli Jews and 7 million Palestinians. So over time, the composition would move towards probably more Palestinians. And then if Israel want to remain Jewish and democratic with equal rights and avoid sort of double standards, it would be better for Israel to have their state and allow the Palestinians to have their state and then live peacefully together. Of course, there are a lot of work to be done before you get there, but I remain committed to working in that direction, and I see more and more people understanding that, you know, you should not only stop the war. I mean, obviously, stopping the war is the first thing you need to do, and there's nothing more important than ending all the killing. But even that is not a solution, because the situation before the Hamas terror attacks on the 7th of October and the subsequent extreme response from Israel was not a stable situation either. So just to go back to the 6th of October, metaphorically speaking, is not a stable solution. And this is why we think this is important. And I should say, speaking about this here in Nairobi, this issue might seem like an issue for the Middle East, but it's actually become a global issue. The whole world cares. People really see in this fight or in this contest between the idea of a Palestinian state, between the moderate Palestinians in Fatah and PLO and the more violent groups in Hamas and the internal discourse in Israel about where the country is heading. This has become much more than itself, because it's kind of symbolic to the world. And in that sense also it was important for us, Norway, to be on the side of those who say we cannot have double standards. You know, human rights are for everybody. Humanitarian law is for everybody. International law are for all countries. And if we do not apply them equally, the rules will eventually wither away and people will stop believing in them.
Indeed. And states being sovereign and all playing on this global arena, then there is the option to then make your stand available to the world. How does all of this play with Norwegian foreign policy, and what has been the foreign policy of Norway when it comes to things like this, whether it is with the Israel-Palestinian issue, whether it is with Somalia border, which, you know, there are questions coming around from this side of the pond. What's the foreign policy when it deals with conflict areas?
So we have a long tradition as Norway and Norwegian foreign policy to engage in peace building, supporting initiatives for compromise, for solutions, for peace, for involvement of the groups that are typically forgotten, civil society, women's groups, and so on, and also dealing with exactly the the conflicts that you mentioned, and many of them are, in this neighborhood. We have a very complicated situation in the Horn of Africa, with Somalia and internal developments in Somalia and its neighborhood in the center. We have a total collapse in Sudan, which is maybe the most dramatic humanitarian situation anywhere on the planet right now. Forgotten by many, probably not here, but in the sort of the world media speaks not much about this, even if we see massacres. Even yesterday there was another major massacre in Sudan. South Sudan, which was already difficult, does not get any easier with what's happening in Sudan, and refugees now coming out of Sudan down to South Sudan or westwards to Chad. So this is an area which really has its own plate of problems, and Norway is engaged, and I should say, working closely with Kenya and Kenyan authorities in trying to facilitate dialogue, to improve humanitarian access, and to look for solutions also for these problems. And I said in a lecture yesterday to the University of Nairobi that stable countries like Kenya and Norway, we are much better off if our neighborhood is stable. It's not enough just to keep order in your own country. I mean, that's a good start. But you also, the economy, society is much better here if we are able to deal with conflicts in the neighborhood. And in my neighborhood, we have the war in Ukraine. Yep. We border on Russia. Russia, tragically, is on the wrong side of that equation. Here, you have an island of stability, but with a lot of challenges around you. And what I very much like about the Kenya-Norwegian cooperation is that we are countries who actually believe that rules should be equally applied. So I care about Gaza, I care about Sudan and Somalia, and I think we need to see that human rights and international law applies to everybody. Kenya takes an interest in Ukraine and has been firm in saying that Russian invasion was wrong. And that means that we actually believe in the UN Charter across the board, and that's a good thing. Not everybody can say that.
And the application of the same standard across the board.
Same standard.
When it comes to international law. So
this is essential, Eric, because if you allow for double standards, if you treat norms as a menu that you can choose from when it suits you, or as Groucho Marx said, that these are our principles, but if you don't like them, we have others. If you take that approach to international affairs, the outcome will be that people say, I don't believe in your rules anyway. So in the end, you have no rules because you don't apply them when they matter. Yeah. So the alternative is to say these rules were meant to be followed. Human rights, all human beings are equal, and their human rights should be respected throughout, regardless of where they were born. International law among countries is equal. All states, big and small, are entitled to protection under international law. And there are rules of warfare which should also be respected across the board. And I think this is really the quest of our times, to reignite a sense that these are universal principles.
How do you do that in this day and age where, for example, Western countries are almost unanimously united on the conflict in Ukraine and saying that international law has been broken and Russia has a responsibility for this. But when it comes to the Gaza conflict, there's sort of like lack of unanimity on whether international law has been broken, whether there's a need to pursue justice, who's responsible entirely for this. Who do you think is entirely responsible for what's happening in Gaza? There's been pursuit for justice for the people of Gaza and placing responsibility on the state of Israel. Do you think that is a good position?
I mean, I'm not sure what the question was, because if you ask whether we should put responsibility on Israel, the answer is yes. But you mean what many Western countries did not, or at least they took way too long to say that. And let me just retract 1 second. Russia attacked a sovereign country, Ukraine. It's a blatant violation of international law. There's no doubt about it. It's really the rule number 1 in the rule book is don't occupy other countries, don't invade other countries. Clear violation. The critique is absolutely correct. Okay. When we came to, the 7th of October was a terror attack against Israel. So Israel, as Kenya and Norway, of course, are entitled to defend themselves against terror. However, any use of military means has to be within the remits, within the limitations of what we call international humanitarian law, which are the rules of warfare. And they say basically that you should distinguish between soldiers and civilians, fighters and civilians, and you should have a proportional response. Now, Israel's response has not been proportional, and it has not sufficiently distinguished between civilians and fighters. So we've been arguing that they have been violating international humanitarian law. And saying that, in my view, means that we do apply principles equally, but I very much agree with the critique of many of my Western friends that they have not, at least not early, they became better over time, but in the beginning it took way too much time because Israel was seen as a Western ally. And then came exactly the problem that we were discussing, that there was a sense here in Africa, in the Arab world, Latin America, Asia, and many Europeans as well, saying, how come we are not applying the same rules? And in our countries in Europe, we have large populations who identify with the Palestinians. They might be Palestinians or from neighboring countries, or more indirectly feel that they identify with that side, who also feel that this means that you don't take us sufficiently seriously either. It's not only the Palestinians in Palestine, but it's double standard. So this has really weakened the image of the West. And together with some other European countries, we're trying to fix that by being clear that, as I said, rules are rules and they apply equally across the board.
Do you think these applications are also affecting the image of the United Nations?
Indeed. And
so?
It worries me.
What then should be done on this? I mean, the United Nations and the application of international law and rules and equality, when it comes to a certain matter, you'll find that some permanent member will put a veto on a certain issue. Another member will put another veto on another issue. But on Sudan, which is the largest humanitarian crisis unfolding in the world right now, no conversation is taking place on what action is to be taken. Where does that place the United Nations?
Well, I understand that people ask that question because you systematically you see if the critique is against Israel, there will be a U.S. veto. If it's against what's happening in Ukraine, there will be a Russia veto. And then you have the cases where nobody seems to care, or they care, but they don't do much, where Sudan is a good case. So I think that and this is, of course, not the institution of the United Nations. It's not the Secretary General Guterres' fault, but it is the members of the Security Council that are not always, in my view, living up to the expectations than we have when we entrust them with this power. You know, there are 5 permanent seats and 10 rotating seats. It was actually just a new election, and Somalia came on the Security Council yesterday, together with my neighbor Denmark and some others. But that, of course, means that the rest of us, the 193 members, are entrusting this body with an authority, and we expect them to lead. And frankly, they are not always leading.
Doesn't it come into question then, in terms of the intent of the Security Council, when it looks at world matters, when we look at geopolitics and how they play out, that each state is sovereign in nature? We come back to the issue of sovereignty, and that each state's interest will be ahead of everything else, no matter what you do. So is it possible to have then a strictly functioning Security Council that is going to take world matters above and beyond individual nation-state matters? Is it really possible to do that? Going by the example of what you've just said, that if there's something that is against an ally of Russia, for example, the likelihood of them using their veto power will be for that which is an ally to them. The likelihood of the United States using veto power to make a decision or to go against one is more likely to be one that aligns with their national interest. How do we have a purely fair functioning Security Council that brings about the matters of the world into perspective if people are going to vote based on their national sovereign interest?
No, well, there are, of course, many cases where they do agree, and there's a long history of UN decisions, UN operations, missions that exist because the Council actually agreed. So let's not create the impression that they are always, they don't veto all the time. But frankly, in too many cases, we see these vetoes. It depends a little bit on how you interpret national interest. Is it your immediate interest right now between today and tomorrow? Or is it the interest of a more stable world in the long run? Because even great powers are better off in a more peaceful world, I would argue.
Yes.
And smaller countries, obviously, are better off in a more peaceful world. So it's not about whether it's interest or something else. It's how you interpret your interest. So I believe that Norway's interest, Norway's North European, quite wealthy country and open economy. We thrive in a peaceful world, and wars are not. Wars are bad for the people affected by war, but it also undermines economic prospects of other people, right? So in a more sort of benign, broad interpretation of self-interest, you could be, more looking at the common good, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Now there is a conversation in the next. General Assembly of the United Nations. There will be a summit on the future, which has been called. And by the way, Norway supports the African position that the Security Council should be expanded. There should be African permanent seats too on the Council. And I don't think it's happening now, but the conversation needs to really start now. If we go that route, it's a good time also to discuss the veto power. If it was up to me, you could take it away. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But you could, because the veto powers have veto against the change of the veto rules. But you could look for option to soften it. Maybe there should be two rather than only one. Maybe you can only do it in certain cases. There is already now a principle that you have to explain to the General Assembly why you use the veto. That's one move. So try to limit the use of veto. So in the long run, make it less dominant in the workings of the UN. And there is also, in that conversation, which is relevant here, is that the strengthening of regional organizations was actually envisaged when the UN was set up. The UN was invented at the end of the Second World War, 1945. And there's a chapter 8 that speaks about regional organizations that actually did not really exist at the time. But now we have the African Union, to take one example. Yeah. A strengthened African Union should, in principle, be able to deal with some of Africa's problem, as well as Europeans could deal with their own, and then only sort of move things to the Security Council attention when it's not solved at the more regional level. So that's also something to discuss when you strengthen African cooperation.
So Norway supports Africa's push to have 2 permanent seats in the UN Security Council.
We do.
We say this is a conversation that could begin at the Summit of the Future, but it may not be realized immediately. What would be the complication of just adding 2 more seats and saying, so we've got 2 permanent members?
Well, first, of course, you cannot only add 2 African seats. I mean, there will be, then what would the Asians say? What would the Latin Americans say? So that would be part of a package where you broaden the permanent seats generally. So it's a broader conversation. I think you were up for a very interesting conversations internally in Africa, which 2 seats that will be. And thankfully, I'm not going to make that decision. That will be up to the Africans. And how will that be representative of the rest of Africa? Would other African countries believe that country X in Africa represents them or only themselves? So these conversations are complicated. But I think, and it's not really that the conversation starts now. I've been hearing about this for the last 30 years. Yeah. But the Summit of the Future is invented to try to put this higher on the agenda. So I hope that, and we will be clearly supportive of such a push. Because the UN was set up by the victors of the Second World War. It was actually a very good initiative, but there were, I think, around 51 states in the beginning. Now we're 193. Most of what the countries that have been added comes from what we call the Global South. Because of decolonization, for instance, that the UN was there before decolonization happened. And when Kenya and other countries became independent, in the 60s, or India in the late 40s, African countries in the 60s, and so on, not only you had more countries, but you had a different type of countries. You know, the composition, the nature of the membership changed, and that hasn't really been reflected in the setup of the organization.
Our guest this morning is the Foreign Minister for Norway. He is visiting the country now, Espen Barth Eide. Kenya and Norway are commemorating 60 years of diplomatic relations this year. So this is a long history of diplomatic relations. We'll talk about that as well. What has this cooperation meant? How have we benefited from being friends with Norway? How has Norway benefited from being friends with Kenya? And so on and so forth. Kenya is in the forefront of pushing for a revamp of the global financial system. When we're saying, look, you can get loans from this global financial system cheaply, with better terms. We need it. We cannot access it cheaply. What's Norway's stand on this?
We agree. I think that's a good description. We need to revamp not only the UN, as we talked about before the little break, but also the international financial institution. That means the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and also the regional development banks. And Norway supports that because we do see that for instance, access to capital is much more difficult in countries like Kenya than in our countries. So, you know, to take a loan or to finance something which is meaningful, it simply is much more complicated. And that both requires the reform of these institutions and, the membership, the stakeholders, the way decisions are made, but also, availability of instruments that can de-risk investments. And this is something that we put even higher now on our development portfolio is money that is there to take down the risk involved in investments. That can be currency risk, it could be regulatory risk, for instance, and all these identifiable sources of the cost of capital being higher in, for instance, African countries. So that is part, and it's actually maybe even more acute than the reform of the Security Council, and also possibly easier to do, because the leadership of these organizations are actually quite friendly to the idea of reform, but they don't necessarily decide themselves. It's the membership that has to decide, including the Western countries that has put more money into them. So this is a key conversation, and again, an area where Kenya and Norway looks eye to eye, because we agree with the diagnosis and we believe we agree with the medicine as well.
What makes Kenya unique in the relationship that Norway would have with other countries outside of Europe, and why is Kenya on that particular?
Well, first we are celebrating 60 years of diplomatic relations. That's interesting simply because Norway was the 5th country in the world to recognize independent Kenya. Independence came in late 63, but we were just into 64, that's why it's 60 years. And throughout, or at least most of that time, we've had a close and benign relationship watching this country develop. Actually, my first visit to this city was 48 years ago. I have, again, as a young man or young boy. And so I've seen developments in Kenya and in Nairobi. We see Kenya as a stable country in an open economy, a growing economy, a youthful a country with a lot of not only a lot of potential but also a lot of innovation, and we want to support that. It's also a good anchor for our partnership with this part of Africa, and we work from here and with Kenya on some of the issues in the more complicated countries in the neighborhood. And then on top of that, we have many common perspectives on international affairs. As someone from Western Europe, I remind my fellow citizens and my colleagues that of the 8 billion people on this planet, 7 billion are not in the West. So we in the West would be well advised to try to understand what the rest cares about. And there are many examples of that, the rest of the world, but Kenya here is a good partner, among many.
So one of the other conversations that's taking place globally right now is on climate change.
Yeah.
Of course, you came into the country a couple of years ago to chair the United Nations Environment Assembly. And the conversation about climate change has been on equity again. The major polluters bear responsibility for what they've done, and then the smaller polluters are actually bearing the brunt for what the major polluters have done. These conversations have been going on for long on, bearing responsibility, putting in money into a pot that can support. It doesn't seem to be moving. What do you think needs to happen to actually unlock climate financing, to unlock a complete and clear conversation on what everybody else should be doing?
Well, first I have to say it is moving. It's not moving fast enough. I agree with that. But we are, if you look at the predictions of global warming before we are able to stabilize the global climate, the predictions were much worse before the Paris Agreement than now. So over the last 9-10 years, we have actually, installed a series of policies which still keeps the global warming still on, but less than it would have been without the climate measures. You see a fast development of renewable energy. You see in many countries fast development of electrified transport. Actually, yesterday I took a trip on one of the new electric buses here in Nairobi, so it's coming here as well. And we see more industry being, using circular methods and renewable energy, new technologies. So it is happening. But you are absolutely right that it is not fair and balanced. For many countries on this continent, it would actually be economically extremely smart to go straight into the future economy, which is circular and renewable. It's actually less expensive in the long run than the old linear and fossil economy. The problem is that you need the upfront investment. Yep. So when you have hydropower, or when you have solar, big solar plants or windmill farms, after that the electricity becomes very cheap. But of course the investment is not cheap, so you have to get the money for the initial investment, and there is a place we need to work more, how we can mobilize capital for these kind of investments. But in the long run, Kenya and Africa, this continent, would probably do really well if this green revolution succeeds, because you have an abundance of sun, for instance. You're close to equator. There's space. There's a lot of natural resources, a lot of young talent. So, to build sort of modern manufacturing on these sort of green sources is actually particularly attractive for Africa. And I want to be, as Norway, a good partner in that development. And I think more and more countries see that. President Ruto had an Africa climate summit last year when we were moving towards Dubai, the UN climate summit, which was very successful. And what I liked about it was that it had a strong sort of can-do attitude. It was not, only problems. It was, there are solutions, there are African ideas, African solutions, and that gave a lot of inspiration. And then you mentioned the UN Environmental Assembly, so UNEP, which is in the city, the UN Environmental Program here in Nairobi, part of the, that Nairobi is the fourth biggest UN capital in the world and the only one in the global south. Yeah. And one of the organizations based here is UNEP, and presiding over UNEP is the Assembly. And I was president of the Assembly 2 years ago. And we managed to get a lot of things done at that meeting. We agreed on the global plastic, to start negotiations on the plastic treaty. We got good resolutions on nature-based solutions to climate problems. We established a science policy panel for chemicals and pollution, for instance. So there's work going on. And I do not agree that nothing is happening, but I will be the first one to say that we have to move faster.
Right. Indeed. There's a lot that when you still talk about, climate financing and going green, like you said, it requires heavy initial investment. And of course, that means that those who are able to initially invest heavily are those that have. The West developed hugely on the back of fossil fuels. Africa is now discovering its own deposits of fossil fuels. And there's been this conversation, okay, guys, please, you don't have to go into fossil fuel. You have an abundance of opportunity and potential for green. Scale down on your fossil and scale up on your green. We know what that means. It means look for money so that you can scale up on green. What is Norway's stand on this? Should Africa be able to exploit its fossil fuel that it's discovering now so it can get to position at par with the rest of the world, where it can afford to accelerate its adoption of green?
So this is actually two different questions in one, because one, what should you use in your own energy mix? So what is the energy source you should use? So my advice would be go as green as you possibly can, because these investments will make energy not only more climate friendly, but actually less expensive, because in the long run, renewables are systematically less expensive than fossil fuels. If you lock yourself into a fossil economy, you will have to pay eternally for the fossil source, whereas the sun is free, right? The wind is free. You just need the windmills or the solar panels, and once you have them, they pick up energy, so the price goes towards zero once you've invested. So that's on the consumption side, what you actually use. A separate question is, should you produce? I mean, should you exploit? And yes, well, the world, even if we are moving towards a renewable world, there's still a demand for natural gas, for instance. Norway also continues to produce natural gas that you can sell to those markets that still use them. So it's hard for me to say that you should not exploit your natural gas or oil reserves for income, but to build your future economy on burning of fossils is old-fashioned. And you know, Norway, which is a large exporter of fossil, we hardly use it ourselves. Our electricity mix is almost 100% renewable. So our domestic development moves away from one of the main products that we sell to others who still use it. So that distinction, I think, is important to make. And this startup called Basigo, which is doing these electric buses, they told me that, you know, Kenya has the electricity mix here is very clean. You know, a lot of hydro, some wind, and at night there is excess electricity, which means the price is low. These electric buses are charged at night, so at a low, you know, price, and drive around in the day where the electricity is more expensive, and then they charge again at night, right? So this is a very smart adaptation to the energy reality. More of this would be good for you, in my view. I think this is good for this country. So, you know, you don't need to develop in the way that we did, because new technologies exist. And there is a very good example that I think you very well know. You know, we had landline telephones to everywhere before the mobile phone came. So we used an enormous amount of copper to bring a copper line into the most remote village, the most remote farm, before anybody got a mobile. Here, you know, of course you had it in cities, but not around the country. Then came the cellular phone, and people smartly thought, let's go straight to mobile technology. And then you invented mobile banking, I think 15 years before us. Because were stuck with the old, and here, you know, innovative solutions were built on new technology. So when this technology exists, there's no way to go back to old. You know, why do 20th century things if 21st century things are available? So I think here, in my little bit too long answer to your great question, I think when it comes to how you build your own economy, go green quickly would be my advice.
Immigration is always a top matter here when it comes to the trade of expertise from one country to the next, especially where there's a development partnership in place. What are the thoughts about that kind of exchange in terms of Kenyans going to Norway, in terms of that kind of trade for work? I'm speaking about this in a space whereby recently the president of Kenya has been looking at places where Kenyans can actually work. And a lot of European countries have come up. Germany, Switzerland, looking at the other side, Canada, the US. Is Norway part of this? And what is the door open for that as well?
Yes, I know about what Germany and others are doing. We have not really followed that route at the time. I'm not precluding that in the future. There are a number of Kenyans living in Norway, actually, and a relatively high immigration has happened. But you know, most people come in as asylum seekers, for instance, and that of course depends. That will typically come from other countries than Kenya for obvious reasons. But it's an open conversation, I think I would say. But it's interesting that this, you know, because European countries are getting older. We need more people in service sector, for instance. In the health service is one good example. And I know that there are countries looking at places like Kenya to be a source if you have excess people. But of course, we should also try to avoid too much brain drain, because you also need to have people, driving your own economy and your own development.
That's interesting, because that was my next question in terms of when we're looking at this. Many have gone beyond brain drain and said even almost sapping of a country's expertise in terms of what can be used for its, local development. And so then what would be the thought there? Would it be better, in your opinion, to develop in Kenya and see what can be done using that development partnership, or go the way where people are leaving?
At least what worries me is if sort of the public education in Kenya produces good doctors and good nurses with Kenyan taxpayers' money, and then once the best ones are then picked to go straight to the UK or Germany, of course means that the Kenya has provided a service in training these people, who then come in quotation mark for free. I mean, of course they get salary, but the education has already been paid for. That's not necessarily a very benign situation for Kenya. I'm not against people moving around, but I mean, I think your priority should be on developing your economy, which is why we have not entered into such a scheme as of now. I'm not precluding anything for the future. But
Foreign Minister, maybe there's another way of looking at this. We are seeing the emergence of ultra-nationalists in many parts of the world who are saying, lock down the borders. This country belongs to the people of this country. And as we see more people coming in, they're coming to erode our values and our systems and to invade our lands. Has Norway faced this kind of political conversation?
We have it as well. I mean, thankfully, it's not as pronounced in Norway as in some other Western countries. It's not the dominant discourse, but it does exist. It does exist. We have to admit that. And we see, what we're seeing now, right now, there's a big election in Europe for the European Parliament. Yeah. All the members of the EU are voting for the members of the Parliament, and we are expecting a swing to the right, to the not that they will be in majority, but the far right parties seem to come out quite well, which then leaves open the big question: what will the traditional conservative parties do? Will they look towards the center, which I think they should, or would they look more to this far right and cozy up with these sort of more immigrant negative parties? And not to speak about America, which is quite interesting, because everyone who is not the original native American Indian, is an immigrant.
Yeah.
The whole thing is built by immigrants, and now they're talking about we who were there first. Well, actually, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants were not there first, but they're still absolutely not. But now they are, trying to use this as an argument. Even there, that worries me quite a bit. So this is it's a problematic trend. But I think that when you look closer at this, you see that if people feel that immigration is under control, in the sense that, you know the numbers, people are allowed in, they apply, they get their visas, they get their work permits, they're quite okay with it. It's this sense, this perception of an unstoppable flow.
Open borders.
Which creates uncertainty, because, and typically the people who are maybe not, not the wealthiest, not the most well-off, are wondering, will these incoming people take, the benefits that I have, because there will be less again for me. I'm not defending it, but it can be understood, right? So I think, to have control on immigration and also control on integration, how do you actually make sure people are, thriving in society, will soften this stance. And if it is felt like it's sort of open borders and no control, you will have more of this reaction.
It's
this
sort
is a
of
big
like
theme.
It's like an oxymoron, isn't it? We are in a conversation now where we are talking about more multilateralism and working together and creating one global village, while at the same time we are talking about looking inwards more, and being more insular. I mean, how do we balance these things out? What's the future? How do you see this future? You're an experienced man in terms of foreign affairs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's you put it very correctly. If you go back, let's go back 30 years. The Soviet Union was over. The Warsaw Pact was not there. The world, was opening up to globalization, and there was actually a spectacular growth across the planet. Also a very big growth in inequalities, it has to be said. But the GDP of most countries grew, either because you were already a rich industrial country, or the demand for raw materials surged because of China's growth, for instance. So everybody, moving forward, and the world seemed to go towards a more globalized world. Now it's going the other direction. Borders are closing, countries are trading more with their closest friends and not across the planet. So we are in a different situation right now. And I think that, back to your theme on sovereignty, I think countries need to look after their own sovereignty, to make sure they have control in their own country, that you have good political institutions, that you know who lives in your country. But based on that, saying we also have some shared interest with others. And as a self-confident sovereign country, Kenya or Norway and countries like ours can then say we take a stance on the international scene because we also want to thrive in a better world. That means a world that can deal with the climate challenge and nature crisis, a world that can be better at responding to conflicts, a world that can provide for benign regulated trade between countries. That's good for us. So that's my vision. But that's not exactly the world we have right now. So there's quite a lot of work left to do.
Right. Do you think that it would, or that it should, essentially bleed on to other nations? Because I think what you've said is fundamental in terms of how the world will be run. And there have been, cliches, phrases, let's make the world a better place. For us to be able to exist in, and for us to be able to exist in with others, other nations around the world who are sovereign in their own right, should that bleed onto others in terms of an action point to be taken and how we deal nation to nation?
Yes, I think we need, those nations, those countries, those governments who believe in this vision need to talk to each other and try to form broad alliances. I think, those days are long gone, where a cluster of Western countries could travel around telling people what to do. Maybe it should never have happened, but it's at least not available now. So we need to build cross-continental alliances between like-minded countries, which is exactly why I'm right here now.
Yeah.
But and I speak to many. I spend much of my time in non-Western countries to try to build these alliances and raise these questions, and then go to the institutions we have, whether it's the UN or the international financial institutions, the World Trade Organization, which is in deep trouble now, and say, as sovereign nations, we also want to share some of that sovereignty. We want to take that sovereignty and say, let's establish some rules which are good for all of us. For instance, rules for trade, rules for financial institutions, because we are not islands. Our economy. Speak of my country, most of what we live through, we export most of what we produce, and we import most of what we consume. Right, so there's which is good. That's the smartest way of doing it, but that requires that you have trade partners and trade rules that actually are upheld. Otherwise, you would have to try to lock in your economy, and then nobody will be better off. So that openness to the world based on rules is incredibly important, and it's important for everyone, but particularly for smaller countries who are not superpowers in their own right. And we need to convince the great powers that in the long run, they are also small compared to the number of the others.
Right.
Indeed.
Foreign Minister, we thank you very much for joining us today in the hot seat of the Situation Room. The Norwegian Foreign Minister Espen Barth Eide has been our guest this morning. Thank you very much. Keeping it locked, we still continue with more conversations.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.